good to go. I am absolutely furious. There are 80,000 people in the Western Division, the lockdown LGAs, and the government, both federally and state, are sending out 4,000 vaccines. I have spoken to people from Walgett and from Burke this morning. There are no vaccines in that part of the world. The staffing is almost non-existent, and there is only 2% of people that have been vaccinated. The responsibility for this is with the Prime Minister, and he stood up in question time today and skited on how yesterday there were a record number of people vaccinated in New South Wales. Well, go tell that to the people that live in the Western Division of New South Wales. Out in that part of the world, there are 80,000 people, and many of them are First Nations people who live in very overcrowded situations where social distancing is almost impossible, and yet it is as if these people don't exist. Well, my message to the Premier and my message to the Prime Minister is that there are Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people out there absolutely exposed because of the cross your fingers and hope this dreadful virus doesn't get into the Western Division of New South Wales. We know that there are 5 cases in Dubbo, and that is expected to grow overnight. And who knows how many cases there are in the other towns in that part of the Western Division, because there has not been any adequate testing. There is no adequate testing, and there are no vaccines. How can this be in an area of New South Wales that is so large and so populated, 80,000 people? My question is, how is this possible? The Aboriginal Medical Services, whom I've spoken to today in that part of the world, are absolutely worried, and they're desperate for vaccines and the go-ahead to get people vaccinated. They don't have the vaccines and they don't have the go-ahead. And as I said, the issue lays squarely with the federal government. These are vulnerable communities who are out there with very low rates of vaccination, high numbers of children, and high numbers of people who are very vulnerable. So, Lorena?
Yep. My question, I've got a few, but my first one is, well, how can this be if Aboriginal and other people have been in their 1B priority group for so long? Why is the vaccination rate in the West so low?
I can't answer why the vaccination rate is so low. We know that Aboriginal people over 60 were in the 1B category, but it appears to me that that has been not taken any notice of by the government out in the Western Division of New South Wales. I don't know how many people know this part of the world. I know it very, very well. And when you get to towns like Brewarrina, Burke, Walgett, they are mostly Aboriginal towns, and there are high Aboriginal populations in the other towns. The other concerning thing that I was told today is that food supplies are running very low because people can't travel to Dubbo to do their shopping, which is where they normally travel to, on a fortnightly or a monthly basis. And the food supplies are dangerously low in some of these communities.
What's your view on Hazard's suggestion this morning that the ADF might be called in to help ramp up the vaccine rollout in the Western Division?
I have not heard the notion put forward by the Health Minister in New South Wales about involving the ADF. But let me tell you, it's an emergency out there, and those communities are sitting ducks. The shuffling of decks on the Titanic, of chairs on the deck of the Titanic, is not going to work anymore. Smokes and mirrors of taking from one vaccine and putting it somewhere else leaves people exposed. So I have no idea why the vaccination rates are so low. But what I do know is that people want this fixed, and people deserve to have this fixed. Carl? The state and the federal government have to understand that these communities are substantial and they're incredibly vulnerable. They are made more vulnerable by the fact that there is a very low vaccine rate in the area, and doubly vulnerable because there are no vaccines and they're being rushed out there now. But 4,000 vaccines to LGAs where there are 80,000 people is both the federal and the state government. How can you have ignored the potential disastrous situation that is emerging in the Western Division? Carl is...
And just lastly, just on the issue of, or the question of how people, particularly Aboriginal people in these communities, will be feeling or have felt about vaccination to this point. Do you think people are concerned about vaccines, as in safety of vaccines? What do you think that people's understanding is of vaccination?
The people, particularly First Nations people in the Western Division, know it's important to get vaccinated. There is vaccine hesitancy, I am told, and they're probably for the very same reasons that we see it in a number of other Aboriginal communities. But what's important is the messaging that is being undertaken or should be undertaken by the federal government. But if there are no vaccines available, what are people supposed to do? And that is the situation. Thanks, guys.
Thanks very much, Linda. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Carl.